Morning sunlight filtered through the dense forest canopy as James Wilson adjusted his camera lens. At 32, he had established himself as a respected wildlife photographer, with work appearing in leading nature magazines and prestigious publications. That morning, he was tracking a family of deer for a documentary about wildlife in the Appalachian foothills. The camera's shutter clicked softly as a doe, and her fawn emerged from the underbrush. But then a faint cry distracted James. At first, he thought it was a bird, but this sound was different. A small whimper, almost like crying. James carefully followed the sound, not wanting to frighten the deer. About 50 m deeper into the forest, he discovered the source. Under a fallen tree trunk, a small creature trembled. A bobcat kitten no larger than a domestic cat. His spotted fur was covered with mud and dried blood, one hind leg twisted at an odd angle. James slowly knelt down. The little bobcat looked at him with fearful yellow eyes, trying to back away, but clearly too much in pain to move. As someone experienced with wildlife, James knew that interfering with nature was often not the best choice. But this animal wouldn't survive without help. James took off his jacket, gently wrapping it around the bobcat kitten. He was too weak to resist strongly. With no time to think further, he quickly returned to his car and called his wife. Emily Wilson, 30, was a veterinarian specializing in wildlife at the local rescue center. When James called, she had just finished a difficult surgery. Without needing many words, Emily immediately understood the situation and prepared for the next emergency case. 20 minutes later, James arrived at the rescue center with a small bobcat. Emily quickly assessed his condition: broken leg, severe malnutrition, and some internal injuries. From her experience, she estimated the animal was only about 3 months old, too young to survive in the wild on his own. "We need to name this little guy," Emily said as they watched the bobcat kittens sleeping after successful surgery. James looked closely at the black spotted ears and amber eyes, characteristic of North American bobcats. "Leo," he decided. "He looks like a Leo." In the following days, Emily and her colleagues did everything possible to save Leo. They treated his wounds, splinted his broken leg, and bit by bit brought him back from the brink of death. James visited daily, often bringing his camera to document Leo's remarkable recovery. They also searched for signs of Leo's mother or siblings in the area where James had found him, but with no results. It was likely that Leo's mother had been poached or met with an accident, leaving her offspring alone. After a month, the difficult question arose. What would happen to Leo next? Releasing a bobcat raised by humans back into the wild is extremely difficult, especially when so young. Zoos in the area were already at capacity, and part of them, both James and Emily, didn't want to part with Leo. Could we do it? James asked one evening as they sat in the living room of their suburban home. Raise him. I mean, Emily knew it was a big decision and legally complicated, but she also felt a special connection with Leo. After many nights of discussion, research, and consultation with experts, they decided to apply for a wildlife ownership permit. The application process was lengthy and expensive. They had to prove they had the knowledge, resources, and appropriate space to care for a bobcat. Their house needed to be inspected and modified to meet safety standards. Friends and family thought they were crazy, spending thousands of dollars and countless hours to adopt a wild animal that might never be fully tamed. But James and Emily persisted, and finally, after 3 months of waiting, the permit was approved. Leo would officially become a member of the Wilson family. The day they brought Leo home was memorable. They had prepared a special room for him with climbing trees, hiding places, and spacious areas to explore. Emily worried that Leo would be frightened and stressed in the new environment. But to their surprise, the little bobcat seemed to recognize his rescuers and appeared remarkably comfortable. When James opened the transport cage, Leo stepped out cautiously, his amber eyes scanning the room. Then, as if knowing he was home, he approached Emily and rubbed his head against her hand, a surprisingly friendly gesture for a wild animal. "Welcome home, Leo," James whispered, and a new chapter in their lives began. The first weeks with Leo were a continuous discovery. James and Emily quickly realized that raising a bobcat was vastly different from raising an ordinary house cat. Leo grew at an astonishing rate and within a few months weighed twice as much as an adult domestic cat. Their house was divided into 2 areas: Leo's wild space, a converted room with climbing trees, caves, and hiding spots, and the rest of the house where they hoped to keep Leo safe and prevent damage to furniture. But this boundary quickly blurred as Leo decided that the entire house was his territory. Whiskers and Mittens, the 2 house cats who had lived with the Wilsons before, were initially terrified of the new intruder. Whiskers, a wise 10-year-old black and white cat, chose to avoid Leo at all costs. often hiding on the highest bookshelves in the house. Mittens, a more energetic 5-year-old calico, oscillated between curiosity and fear. Leo, for his part, was very interested in his new siblings. He watched their every move with undisguised curiosity, attempting to mimic behaviors like when Whiskers washed his face or Mittens played with small balls. These were the first moments when James and Emily realized that Leo was beginning to think of himself as a house cat. A major challenge was Leo's diet. As a complete carnivore, bobcats need a protein-rich diet with raw meat. Emily worked with colleagues to develop a balanced diet, including horse meat, organ parts, day-old chicks, and occasionally mice, all purchased from safe and legal sources. But Leo also developed a surprising taste for human foods. He especially loved boiled shrimp, but only if they were peeled and given to him one at a time. He also discovered a fondness for sour cream, able to hear the sound of the sour cream container opening from anywhere in the house. An unforeseen problem was the litter box. Even the largest cat litter boxes were too small for Leo. After much experimentation, James designed a custom litter box using a large plastic bin filled with sand. Surprisingly, Leo quickly understood its purpose, perhaps partly from observing Whiskers and Mittens. Door frames in the house gradually became victims of Leo's powerful claws. Although they provided many scratching posts, Leo's territorial marking instincts often prevailed. James had to get creative, turning door frames into giant scratching posts by wrapping them with thick sile rope. Trimming Leo's claws was another challenge. Every 2 weeks, James and Emily had to perform this mission impossible. Leo would lie still patiently, perhaps understanding that this was an unavoidable part of his new life. But his look during those moments seemed to say, "I'm letting you do this, but don't take it for granted." Bathing Leo was even more difficult. Unlike tigers, the only big cats that enjoy water, Leo instinctively hated water. But walking around the house with muddy fur wasn't an option. So, every few weeks, James and Emily had to prepare mentally for the bathtub battle. They developed a strategy. James would gently bring Leo into the bathroom while Emily prepared warm water. Leo would usually sit in the tub, growling, not to intimidate, but to express his displeasure. A few minutes into the bath, Leo would become completely calm, even appearing relaxed, and that's when chaos would ensue. With astonishing agility, Leo would leap up and escape, covering the house with soap and water. With his large, wide paws, he left foamy footprints on every possible surface, and thus began a chase, ending with James, Emily, and Leo all soaking wet and covered in soap bubbles. The relationship between Leo and the two house cats developed in unexpected ways. Initially, Whiskers maintained a safe distance, jumping onto high surfaces that Leo couldn't access, but gradually the old cat became bolder, occasionally allowing Leo to come close as long as it was on Whiskers' terms. Mittens, always more active and daring, became a sort of guide for Leo. They began playing together, though Leo had to learn to restrain his strength. It was interesting to see a 30-pound bobcat trying to wrestle gently with a house cat weighing only 1/3 his size. Sometimes James would catch Leo and Mittens curled up sleeping together, an image he never imagined he would see. Leo also developed a special bond with James. Each morning when James worked in his home office, Leo would lie at his feet, emitting a contented growl, unlike a house cat's purr, more like a soft rumble. When James developed photos in his makeshift dark room, Leo would often sit on a nearby chair, watching every movement with intense focus. But it was Emily whom Leo sought out when he felt unwell or injured. Perhaps he still remembered that she had healed his broken leg. Every time Emily returned from the rescue center, Leo would run to the door to greet her and follow her around the house as she told him about her workday. Leo's strangest behaviors were when he tried to do things that only house cats do. He attempted to sit on windowsills like Whiskers, though he was too large and heavy, causing James to reinforce several windowsills in the house. He tried to lie in boxes like Mittens, though he often ended up crushing the box. And, most surprisingly, he attempted to sit on Emily's lap when she watched TV, an adorable but painful effort for Emily with over 30 pounds of weight concentrated on her legs. Within a year, Leo had completely changed the Wilsons' lives. Their house had been modified to accommodate a bobcat resident. Their habits had changed to meet his needs, and both James and Emily couldn't imagine life without Leo. But as Leo continued to grow and mature, his wild instincts began to emerge, creating new challenges that none of them were prepared for. As Leo entered full adulthood, around 18 months old, changes in his behavior became apparent. Sometimes James and Emily would catch Leo standing motionless by the window, his amber eyes focused on the nearby forest, his head slightly tilted as he listened to sounds that human ears couldn't detect. In those moments, they were reminded that although Leo might think he was a house cat, wild nature still flowed in his veins. Leo began developing a more complex personality. He became more territorial, marking his areas by rubbing his face against furniture and walls, a natural behavior for bobcats, but much stronger than in house cats. He also became more wary of strangers, no longer the curious and friendly Bobcat Kitten they had welcomed home. An incident occurred one autumn afternoon when their neighbor, Mr. Miller, stopped by to borrow a tool. Previously, Leo had met Mr. Miller many times and even allowed him to pet him. But this time, when Mr. Miller entered the backyard where Leo was sunbathing, Leo's reaction was very different. He growled, his fur stood on end, and in a tense moment, he lunged toward Mr. Miller, just close enough to frighten him into falling back against the fence. Leo didn't attack Mr. Miller. He stopped right in front of him and ran away. But the incident was a wake-up call for James and Emily. They began to wonder if their decision to raise Leo was truly right. Were they harming Leo by keeping him away from his natural environment? And would Leo ever be truly safe around people? They consulted Dr. Reina Martinez, a leading expert on bobcat behavior who had worked with many cases of wild animals raised in human environments. After observing Leo, she concluded that releasing Leo back into the wild would almost certainly lead to his death. Leo had become too familiar with humans, and although his wild instincts remained, he lacked the survival skills that could only be learned from a bobcat mother. But you need to create an environment that allows Leo to express his natural instincts, she explained. Wild animals confined in limited spaces can develop negative behaviors and become unhappy. The problem was their suburban home didn't have enough space for an adult bobcat to express his wild nature. James and Emily faced a difficult decision. They loved Leo and couldn't imagine giving him up, but they also understood that love sometimes means doing what's best for those you love, even when it hurts you. After many nights of discussion and considering options, they came to a bold decision, moving to a new house in the countryside where Leo could have more space. It was a major financial decision and would mean James would have to commute farther for work, but they felt it was the only choice if they wanted to keep Leo. They found a 5-acre property on the outskirts of town with a small house and extensive land bordering a forest. With Dr. Martinez's help, they designed a safe outdoor area for Leo, a half-acre area surrounded by a special fence, tall enough and buried deep enough to prevent Leo from digging or climbing over. This area included trees, rocks, and even a small stream, all elements that a bobcat would find in a natural environment. Moving wasn't easy. Leo was stressed throughout the process, and in the first days at the new house, he hid under the bed, refusing to eat. But gradually, as he explored the larger new space, especially his outdoor area, a positive change occurred. Leo began spending more time outdoors, watching birds and small animals, sunbathing on large rocks, and even swimming in the small stream. Apparently, his dislike of water didn't apply to voluntary activities. His territorial and aggressive behaviors decreased significantly when he had space to express his natural instincts. James and Emily created a schedule for Leo, mornings and evenings indoors with the family and most of the daytime in his outdoor area. They also worked with an environmental enrichment specialist to create new challenges and activities to keep Leo mentally sharp and positive. Whiskers and Mittens also enjoyed the new house, though they were kept separate from Leo's outdoor area for safety reasons. Inside the house, the strange relationship between Leo and the two house cats continued to develop. Whiskers, now elderly and wise, seemed to have accepted his role as a kind of mentor to Leo, sometimes allowing the large bobcat to lie beside him on the sofa. Mittens and Leo remained playmates, though their games were now more closely supervised. As the new balance was established, James and Emily began sharing their story. James, with his photography skills, documented daily life with Leo in an amazing series of photos. Emily started writing a blog about their experience. Initially, it was just a way to share with family and friends, but it quickly attracted an astonishing number of followers. People were captivated by images of Leo trying to fit into a box too small for him or curled up on the bed like a giant house cat. But they were also drawn to Emily's candid stories about the challenges of raising a wild animal and the compromises necessary to ensure Leo's happiness. The blog and photos led to media interviews, and James and Emily quickly became unofficial spokespersons for bobcat conservation. They used their new platform to raise awareness about the threats bobcats face, from habitat loss to illegal hunting, and advocated for better protection for these wildcats. They also constantly emphasized an important message. Leo was a special case, and keeping wild animals as pets is usually not a good idea. We don't encourage people to keep bobcats, Emily often explained. Leo came to us under very special circumstances, and we've had to make major changes in our lives to meet his needs. As Leo turned 3, their story had inspired a small movement to improve conditions for wild animals kept in zoos and rescue centers. James and Emily worked with experts to develop guidelines on environmental enrichment for captive wildcats, helping improve their quality of life. One day, about 2 years after moving to the new house, Emily was sitting on the porch watching Leo sunbathing in his outdoor area. He had retained some house cat habits. He still loved boiled shrimp and sour cream, still tried to fit into boxes too small for him, and still woke James and Emily at 5:00 a.m. when he wanted attention. But he had also become a strong, healthy bobcat, confident in his semi-natural environment. As Emily watched, Leo climbed a tall tree in his area, moving with a grace and confidence no house cat could match. At the top, he stretched out on a branch, his amber eyes lazily looking down to where Emily sat. In that moment, Emily understood that Leo was neither entirely a house cat nor entirely wild. He was a special creature living between two worlds, carrying within him the wildness of his ancestors, but also the love and trust in the humans who had rescued and raised him. And perhaps Emily reflected that was the beauty of Leo's story, a story not about taming wildness, but about finding harmony between those two worlds. As the sun began to set, Leo jumped down from the tree and headed toward the door leading into the house. It was time for dinner and family time. Emily smiled as she opened the door, and the large bobcat walked in, rubbing his head against her leg in the way both house cats and bobcats do to show affection. "Welcome home, Leo," she said softly, and they both entered the warm house, where James was waiting with a plate of peeled, boiled shrimp, Leo's favorite delicacy. The lessons they learned from their journey with Leo weren't just about the boundary between wild and tame, but about human responsibility toward the natural world. As natural habitats for wildlife are increasingly threatened by human activities, stories like Leo's remind us of the amazing adaptability of animals and of love that can cross species boundaries. But most importantly, it reminds us that sometimes to truly love a creature, we must respect its true nature, not trying to change it into something else, but creating space for it to be itself. For Leo, that meant a life combining the comfort of a house cat with the freedom of a bobcat. And for James and Emily, it was a lesson about love, sacrifice, and joy found in the most unexpected relationships.